There is nothing original about the title for this morning's sermon. It is the same title as an episode of The West Wing from the first season, episode 5, for those of you who will need a Netflix fix this afternoon. The entire title of that episode was The Crackpots and These Women, but we'll leave the sermon about the crackpots for another day. The dilemma for the preacher on Mother's Day is how to approach the day. For too many, the day is not a hallmark moment. The relationship between mother and child was not good. The ability to have a child was compromised. The right person with which to raise a family never materialized. Added to all of that are the multitudes of messages shared over generations that subtly and not so subtly suggest that a woman's truest worth is found in her ability to bear and raise a child, and you can begin to see why this day presents no small number of pastoral challenges. So we're heading in a different direction this morning. That different direction began 36 years ago for me when I entered seminary and met the Reverend Dr. Johanna W. von Vick Boss. Before I entered seminary, I had been raised in a fairly conservative, sometimes even fundamentalist evangelical church. I didn't know anything else. When I got to seminary, there was this brilliant, loud, over-the-top, justice-oozing feminist with a thick Dutch accent and a compelling way of engaging the world and the scriptures that I had never heard before. Tug by tug, pool by pool, Johanna pulled the blinders of patriarchy from around my eyes, and I began to see things in a different way. I saw the overwhelming presence of male dominance and privilege, how I benefited from it, and how easily it would be throughout my life to rely on it and preserve it. I could go on and on about this woman, but there's more to the sermon. Suffice it to say, I am who I am today in large part because of Johanna Boss. Blame her. She came to Pennsylvania to preach my ordination almost 33 years ago. That was a sermon. It is the only time in the history of that well-established conservative Presbyterian church that the word bosom was used twice in one sentence. But she introduced me to the work of Dr. Letty Russell when I did an independent study in feminist theology with her. In one of her books, Dr. Russell wrote, "Whatever else the true preaching of the word would need to include, it at least would need to be a word that speaks from the perspective of those who have been crushed and marginalized in our society. It would need to be a word of solidarity, healing, and love in situations of brokenness and despair, and a disturbing and troubling word of justice to those who wish to protect their privilege by exclusion." So today we speak a word in solidarity from the perspective of those who have been marginalized and even forgotten, and we challenge those who protect their privilege by exclusion. We speak a word of those who have been silenced in the church. We speak a word today for these women. The women I speak of were all known to me, and were more than I can possibly name. They were participants in quilting together the fabric of my faith. They all quietly and not so quietly demonstrated and spoke that faith and the truth of the gospel, and made it possible for me to believe that I could live that life of faith that they lived as well. It begins, of course, with my mother, Ora Lillian Fredley Fleming Hart, and her mother, Ora Ethel Sterling Dobson Fredley. They would want me to include all of those names. These two were a pair, both musical, both committed to their church, both devotees of Billy Graham, both full of more than their fair share of the devil. Extraordinary senses of humor, astounding senses of hospitality. Mom and Grammy lived the faith in a way that would be impossible for any right-thinking person to miss their commitment to Jesus Christ. Little wonder I have been a Presbyterian since birth. It is a pre-existing condition, considering these women from whom I descend. Elizabeth Whiteman was a short, plump, no-nonsense Episcopalian who came to work for the Presbyterians when there was no real work for her in her own church. This was in the mid-1960s. We always called her Miss Whiteman, and though later in life she invited me to call her Betty, it just never seemed appropriate. She was our choir director and organist at the Parkwood United Presbyterian Church in Allison Park, Pennsylvania. She was the one who taught me to sing the Lord's song and to memorize as many of them as tickled her fancy. One hymn a month, all verses, committed to memory, and quizzed. I think I sang with her for 6 years. That's 72 hymns in Whiteman time. But she taught me to love the music of the church, and for that I could never hope to repay her. This woman is one of the reasons we sing many of the hymns we sing, and why I passed more tests than I care to mention to you, because I knew the songs of our faith and what we believe we sing. Dr. J. Bardara McCandless was my professor of Christian education at Westminster College in New Wilmington, Pennsylvania. Barty was a jewel, a superb educator, a woman of deep faith, a mezzo-soprano whose rich voice could move you to tears. Barty taught me the power of compassion at a time in my life when it could not have been a more important lesson. This woman, though never married and without children of her own, has influenced the lives of hundreds of thousands of children through her students. Then there are those women, most of whom are now gone, along with the church we shared, the women I refer to as the veterans of the Turkey Wars at Oakland Presbyterian Church in Springfield, Ohio. Lillian, Audrey, Pat, Sybil, Thelma, and so many more, the Presbyterian women who would cook for 2 days every year, sun up to sundown, to prepare a turkey supper for 300 people and make for their efforts no more than $1,500. One of them was Florence Kessler. Each woman had a particular job, and Florence was the person who chopped the celery for the dressing. Her husband Clayton was not feeling well the morning the celery was to be delivered. So Florence called me to ask if I would mind stopping by their house to pick up the celery and deliver it to the church and the commandant in charge of dressing. I went to their home, and Florence invited me into her very humble kitchen. There were 2 bread wrappers filled with perfectly cubed, finely diced celery. Florence, I said, this is amazing. These are perfectly cut. This must have taken you forever to do. Well, Florence said to me, it is for the church. Did you hear that? Nothing short of perfection, because it was for the church. I wish I could bottle that and share it around. This woman made a statement of her faith through cutting celery. And every time I chop celery to this day, I remember Florence Kessler and her faith. Make the turn toward home with me. More than a few years back, we began the process of restoring all of these stained glass windows in the sanctuary. An unanticipated gift from someone hardly anyone knew got the ball rolling, and very quickly all of the windows were subscribed, except one. You can't see it. But up there, behind the Fisk organ, on the second level, is a magnificent window. The only people who get a chance to see the window are the members of the choir. It's large and colorful and extraordinary, but for all intent and purpose, it is invisible. Who would pay to restore an invisible stained glass window? The Presbyterian women. They took on the project, brought forth the funds, and the window is completely restored. The rain doesn't seep in anymore. The glass is beautiful once again. Through rummage sales and personal offerings, these women stepped up to complete what was a somewhat thankless project. And what more should I say? For time would fail me to tell of Blanche Young, Mary French Riley, Valoria French Shanklin, Eliza Drew Barnes, Laura Castleberry Dunkerson, who gave the Tiffany window, Martha Orr Baird, Emily Orr Clifford, Jean Cavell, Mary Danatel, Candy Thompson, Naomi Lockridge, Charlotte Ricard, Helen Stoutenborough, Sue Woodson, Edna Vinson, Patricia Snyder, and so many more, whose lives and faith and generosity make our continued life as a congregation possible. These women and more are some of the reasons we are here today. And there are so many more women with us still, sitting within these walls this morning, whose gifts, commitment, faith in action, and witness continues to speak to us and calls us to new ventures in ministry and mission. To name them all, we would undoubtedly leave someone out. But look around. These are those who have been crushed and marginalized in our society, with whom we declare a word of solidarity, healing, and love in situations of brokenness and despair. And we pledge ourselves to offer a disturbing and troubling word of justice to those who wish to protect their privilege by excluding others. These women are those who taught the children, cleaned the silver, prepared the meals, paid the bills when the church's money ran short, sat on thankless church boards and committees, and did all the work that no one else was willing to do, but made the work of the church run smoothly. These women are the living witnesses and embodied examples of the gospel of justice, inclusion, and grace. Like all those women whose stories we heard again this morning, told by women, these women, with us here and surrounding us in that great cloud of witnesses beyond, these women are the reason we are here today. They are our faith mothers. They nurtured us, taught us, displayed their witness for us, and challenged us then and challenge us still to be God's faithful and authentic people. For all these women, we give thanks to God for now and evermore. Amen.